Welcome to the second installment in my Great Animal Escape series. This video focuses on primates large and small. From the relatively tiny rhesus monkey to the mighty gorilla, the most human-like non-human animals are, unsurprisingly, not bad at climbing or using tools to achieve freedom. Again, I will warn you that the scenarios presented do not always end well for the animals or people. No people were killed by the escaped animals in this video, but there were a few human injuries. One of the apes was, unfortunately, killed. Frank Buck's Jungle Camp was a roadside zoo in New York, USA, in the early 1900s. These kind of roadside attractions were common in that era. This particular encampment contained animals such as big predatory cats and rhesus monkeys. How many rhesus monkeys, you ask? 570. That's right, this park had 570 rhesus monkeys. One day in October of 1935, a park employee was tasked with bathing the monkeys. I don't know what the guy did to be stuck with the Sisyphean task of bathing 570 monkeys, and by this point the reasoning behind it is probably lost to history. The monkey enclosure had a moat designed to keep the monkeys in the exhibit, but it had the added side effect of keeping the humans out of the exhibit. When the employee needed to get into the enclosure to bathe the monkeys, he put a board down over the moat to create a bridge. He then crossed the bridge into the enclosure and commenced Operation Monkey Scrub. One small issue, though. He forgot to remove the bridge. At one point, he turned around to see a line of monkeys walking out the door into the open park. He immediately recrossed the bridge, removed it, and closed the door. He then went and informed all the park officials that some monkeys had escaped. People in the park began trying to chase the monkeys in an attempt to recapture them in a scene I can only assume looked like something out of an early Looney Tunes short. They actually managed to catch 2 of the monkeys. A few more escaped. And by a few more, I mean about 172 were now on the loose on Long Island. Differing sources have differing numbers of monkeys, but most agree on the 172 figure. Either way, that's a lot of monkeys. Like, approximately 12.83 barrels of monkeys, or 4.83 metric barrels for the international audience. 30 of the monkeys did return the evening of the escape. They had their little monkey adventure and I guess wanted to sleep in their own habitat. It left 142 monkeys unaccounted for. The park was offering money and free season passes for the return of any monkeys, which is a bit of a strange transaction if you think about it. Here's your monkey back. I'd like to see 400 more of them, please. Some of the monkeys were found playing in people's backyards, harassing fruit vendors for food, and a group of them got onto railroad tracks and inadvertently forced a train into an emergency stop while the rail crew tried to shoo the monkeys away from the tracks. Eventually, many of the monkeys were returned to the park, although no one seems sure if all the monkeys were brought back. There isn't currently a pack of rhesus monkeys terrorizing and/or amusing Long Island, though, so I'm guessing the zoo either got back all the living ones, or the permanent escapees didn't find life in New York too hospitable. An orangutan named Ken Allen was something of a folk hero and urban legend in San Diego, California, USA, in the late 1980s and 90s. He single-handedly cost the San Diego Zoo over a reported $50,000 in upgrades to his enclosure in an attempt to keep him inside it. But Ken Allen could not be contained. Ken Allen laughed at your pathetic human enclosures. Ken Allen may have been the most prolific great ape escape artist of all time. As a juvenile, he would unscrew the bolts to his cage, wander around the nursery he was in, then return and replace the bolts before zoo staff arrived in the morning. For his first escape attempt as an adult, on June 13, 1985, he climbed up a retaining wall and got free. He then wandered around the park observing other animal exhibits before being returned to his enclosure. The zoo increased the height of the wall behind the moat in his area by 4 feet, or 1.2 meters, in response to the escape. In July of 1985, Ken escaped again. This time they found him in another enclosure throwing rocks at an orangutan named Otis. Otis and Ken Allen used to share an enclosure. They had to be separated because Otis was described as, quote, not the most amenable. In August of 1985, a worker left a crowbar in Ken Allen's area while working. Ken gave the crowbar to an orangutan named Vicky, who promptly pried open a window, allowing Ken to escape yet again. At this point, I'm convinced if you dropped Ken Allen into the cast of Ocean's 11, he'd fit right in. Ken Allen had gotten so popular that the zoo began printing Ken Allen t-shirts and selling them. Bumper stickers were printed with the phrase "Free Ken Allen," and a local brewery called the Monkey's Paw Brewery, because of course that would be the brewery's name, began making a beer in honor of the orangutan. One newspaper even dubbed him Harry Houdini, which stuck as a nickname. The zoo then put electric wire on the wall to discourage climbing. In addition, they had noticed that Ken Allen knew not to try any of his shenanigans in front of uniformed zookeepers. They sent in undercover park employees to observe the ape, which they described as, quote, guerrilla tactics, because this story clearly didn't have enough primate-based wordplay already. I may as well just go ahead and refer to Ken Allen's actions as monkey business and get all the classic simian puns out of the way. 2 years later, Ken Allen escaped again somehow. He was found wandering the park and even having his picture taken with park visitors. He was corralled and returned to his enclosure by zoo veterinarians. Additional female orangutans were added into his area in hopes they'd keep him distracted, but in typical "we didn't think this all the way through" fashion, Ken Allen began teaching the females how to escape the enclosure. 2 females, Jane and Kumong, escaped using a 5-foot-long squeegee that window washers had left behind. Jane was tranquilized outside the flamingo exhibit, but Kumong returned willingly. In total, Ken Allen either directly or indirectly was involved with 9 total breakouts. He died in the year 2000, but I'll bet if there's a way to escape the afterlife, Ken Allen is probably already on it. When I first thought of making a video in this series about primates, I found several stories about gorillas escaping. The problem is that they're all short and basically follow the same pattern. Gorilla escapes, violence and/or hijinks ensue, then the gorilla returns to the enclosure or is somehow incapacitated. I still wanted to include the gorilla stories though, because gorillas are probably the most terrifying great ape. Depending on the type of gorilla, one can lift over half the weight of a Honda Civic. And if you think I'm making that up, a male silverback gorilla can deadlift over 1,760 pounds, or about 794 kilograms. A Honda Civic weighs about 2,900 pounds, or about 1,315 kilograms. If a silverback got on each end of the car, not only could they lift it, they could possibly toss it a short distance. I couldn't figure out what to do with the information until the similarity of the stories struck me and gave me a bolt of inspiration. That's right, it's time for a gorilla lightning round. Jabari, a western lowlands gorilla that escaped in Dallas, Texas, USA, went on a rampage. He injured 4 people, including a 3-year-old, and was fatally shot. Little Joe, a juvenile silverback gorilla that escaped in Boston, Massachusetts, USA, briefly drags a 2-year-old child. The child only suffered minor injuries. Little Joe was tranquilized and recaptured. Koga, a silverback gorilla that escaped in Buffalo, New York, USA, bit a zookeeper. The situation was described as the animal being overly excited, more so than trying to harm anyone. It was more like a puppy nip than a full-on attempt to do damage. Koga was tranquilized and recaptured. Mike, a western lowlands gorilla that escaped in Columbia, South Carolina, USA, knocked down a guy working at a pizza stand. Mike then went back to his sleeping area 5 minutes later. Kumbuka, a silverback gorilla that escaped in London, England, drank 5 liters of blackcurrant squash juice. He was tranquilized and recaptured. Kiki, a silverback gorilla that escaped in Seattle, Washington, USA, watched some polar bears and decided he didn't want any of that smoke. He then ripped the doors of an exhibit off their hinges to get inside. He was tranquilized and recaptured. And finally, Evelyn and Jim, 2 gorillas that escaped multiple times in Los Angeles, California, USA. One visited the elephant and giraffe exhibits and once, quote, swatted someone's bottom. And that does it for the gorilla lightning round. And now, on to our final story. I apologize for the poor picture quality in the graphic for this one, but this incident happened in 1928. The only photo I could find was a picture of the Providence Journal's coverage of the story. I'll put a link in the description to the article from the Providence Journal that I used as one of my primary sources for this story. It has a picture in better detail, but, you know, it is still a picture of a newspaper from 1928. Now, I mentioned earlier how people chasing the monkeys around the park on Long Island was like something out of a Looney Tunes short. This story sounds more like a full on early era Looney Tunes film. Back in August of 1928, a monkey named Jocko dashed out of Monkey Island at the Roger Williams Park Zoo in Providence while it was being cleaned. He stayed on the run for 2 weeks, at which point he encountered a housewife and chased her back indoors. The police were called, who wound up calling firefighters because Jocko was swinging through the trees and they thought the fireman's ladder would help capture the creature. The problem is, a monkey can move from tree to tree faster than a fireman can move a ladder, so Jocko evaded capture. Children tried to tempt the monkey with bananas, but to no avail. Jocko was in the same neighborhood the next day, where some children tried shooting him with their air guns. None of the children hit, and the spectacle did lead to the zoo putting out a request that everyone please stop shooting at the monkey. One man did manage to have the monkey take a peach from him, but Jocko immediately retreated. He even threw the pit of the peach at a small crowd that had gathered. Housewives tried tempting him with food as well, but he continued to elude his would-be captors until September 3rd. Jocko was rummaging through some garbage when he was spotted by a local. The man was able to lure Jocko within reach, then, and this is a statement I didn't think I'd ever say, the man sucker punched the monkey. The punch knocked Jocko off balance and startled him, causing him to lash out and try to bite the man's knee. Firefighters were called again, and this time they quickly captured the physically and emotionally stunned animal. They turned Jocko over to the police, who for some reason decided to book the monkey like he was a human fugitive. A gathering formed outside the precinct to observe the scene. Of course, because when you turn something like this into a spectacle, things have a tendency to go full Murphy's Law. The monkey escaped from the box they were keeping him in and jumped up onto a window frame. Now, the 15 police officers had leapt into action, grabbing items to stand on in order to try to apprehend Jocko. Again. The crowd erupted into cheers, although it was never made clear if they were cheering for the police or the renegade monkey. At this point, everyone was through dealing with this monkey. The monkey was apparently put in a cab, I'm assuming with a human, but that wasn't stated in my sources, and returned to the zoo. He was then put back on Monkey Island with his simian compatriots. That's all for this installment. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and/or share. The next video in this series will be about birds. I can say there will be another lightning round, but I'm willing to bet it won't be for the kind of bird you think it is. Maybe leave a comment stating what kind of bird you think it'll be, and we'll see if you're correct.